All right, so welcome to the alumni panel briefing on executive leadership in the social work profession. We have 5 people here to be speaking about their journey from the Silver School of Social Work to positions in executive leadership in social work positions. So if each of you could introduce yourselves and a little bit about what you do and when you graduated from Silver, that would be wonderful.
I'm Victoria Dexter. I graduated my MSW was 1999, and my Ph.D. that is easier to remember because I got that in May. I'm Vice President of Mental Health Treatment at Safe Horizon, which is a victims assistance agency here in New York. And what I do most of the time is run the outpatient mental health clinic in downtown Brooklyn.
Hi, I'm Sylvia Toothovitch, and I am the president and founder of the Critical Therapy Center, and we're rather a new endeavor. We just started in January of this year. And we provide counseling, also trainings and consulting to nonprofit and for-profit businesses. So most of the time I try to what do? I do a lot of things. I think when it's sort of like a startup, so we all do everything. It's an exciting job. It's also sort of one of my passions. I've worked in the social services arena for a very long time and decided that it was time to start the Critical Therapy Center. And I'll just say this, that critical therapy is something that, we sort of came up with. It's a combination between psychoanalysis or any type of, interpersonal therapy, liberation psychology, and critical pedagogy. So.
My name is Jeff Palladino. I graduated in 2000, my master's from NYU, and I'm currently an assistant principal at a small New York City public high school in the Bronx called Fannie Freedom High School.
I'm Marjorie Suckle. I actually am at FEGS, and they put us together next to each other because we're both from the Bronx. I run the region of the Bronx where we have about 6 clinics, a large day program for pros, what pros is, right? And we also have an adult home, and then we have school-based programs as well. And we're very busy. But it's great. It's really great. So I hope we get to talk more about why we do what we do.
My name is Clark Williams, and I received my master's in social work here in 1997. It was 15 years ago, and the building hasn't changed a bit, which I'm happy about. I'm from California. I live in San Jose, which is the heart of Silicon Valley. I've had a number of different titles over the years, and involved in a lot in community leadership. But currently I'm a local elected official in Santa Clara County. I'm the vice chair of the Santa Clara County Open Space Authority, which is a public agency, a special district in California. I'm also the board chair of the Silicon Valley Council of Nonprofits, which is 200 member agencies, which is an advocacy organization for the nonprofit sector. And probably the most difficult job I have is being president of my daughter's PTA. That's, I think, the most political job that I have.
Great. So now we're going to go into some questions, so you don't have to go in order. You can just speak when you feel necessary. So I'd like people to talk about your career paths and how the journey that you went through from being a student here to where you are now.
Can I just ask a question? Mm-hmm. I just wondered where you guys are from. Are you master's level, BSW, Ph.D.? Where are you at in the school?
First year master's.
Second year master's. Graduated.
Good.
Second year.
First year master's.
Sorry for interrupting.
No problem.
I mean, for me, it was I always loved working with people, and I always loved, being able to assist people and help people. And then education kind of just, I started working in schools as a substance abuse counselor after working some years in a mental health clinic. And then I went back and got my master's, and we you say the word passion. So a bunch of us who were friends of mine, colleagues who worked in the school, there was a new opportunity to start small schools in the Bronx, and we did that. So we went and said, let's start a school, and I came on as the social worker, counselor part of it. I eventually switched over to administration and became an assistant principal, mostly because it was passion based. It was, we started this together. It was our baby. We loved it. We cared about it. And all of a sudden, my roles, my role at the school, like a startup, change. You do everything, and before you knew it, it was more and more administrative issues that I was taking care of, and still student contact and work with the local community. But it was more and more, the running of the organization and that. And so all of a sudden, this kind of labor of love became a different position. But it all started with passion about what I was doing.
Well, I initially got a master's in psychology, and I was actually thinking of getting my Ph.D. in psychology. And then I realized that, well, what happened was I said, well, I think I want to incorporate some social justice perspective into my training. The reason for that is I got a master's in psychology, went into analytic training, and then came out as a psychoanalyst, but was working in the social services field, and I just felt like I couldn't just do a PhD and sort of not incorporate the social justice perspective. So I got my master's in social work, and I've worked at several agencies, big agencies like Sanctuary for Families, and sort of small agencies, smaller like Queen's Pride House. And there were two reasons why I started the Critical Therapy Center. The first reason was there was a passion I was so dissatisfied with psychoanalysis and also with social services industry, I want to call it, the nonprofit sort of industrial complex. And one of the things I've noticed was that we were very good in the nonprofit field about talking about how we work with our patients or our clients, and how we want to offer social justice, and how we want to stand up for things that we believe in. But within organizations, as an administrator, we don't do that with our own staff. And there's a lot of injustice, and there's a lot of things that people don't address. And I didn't want to be a part of that anymore. I just wanted to try something different. So my belief is that one could, sort of have a good agency or make profit, and also treat humans that you work with in a non-authoritative, non-coercive role. And that's going to be the challenge, I guess. In a few years we'll know if it works or not.
I think for me, I got involved in executive management almost by accident in a way. I was working in Brooklyn, New York with a women's healthcare agency and doing my clinical work, and the founder of the agency decided to pursue her Ph.D., so she left. And the board looked around and saw us and looked at me and said, would you be willing to serve as the executive director? And I panicked and said, absolutely not. Was very happy with my clinical work. And then I thought, if I were to do it, I didn't know if I'd be any good at it. I didn't know if I would like it. But I thought I could do it in a very similar fashion, as a way to sort of be the boss after having a series of bad bosses along the way. And I thought, well, this is something that I can do as a social justice organization, putting myself in that role to see whether or not I could actually implement some of my ideas. And much of the training that we had here at the Silver School. So I did that, and I realized I was actually pretty good at it. I learned my way, worked my way around budgets, and found myself really enjoying executive management. And of course, really doing so, I really saw my work as an extension of the advocacy for my clients, for the clients of the agency, and doing that as an executive. And I think once you do that, have served some time as an executive manager, you end up building a skill set that you can then use and go to different agencies and to different systems as well. And that's what I've been able to do really throughout my career.
I guess as I'm listening, I think it's like a development for each of us. And I think, like you, I went through the analytics therapy, the whole 9 yards in terms of becoming a psychoanalyst. And I think that all of us probably here wanted to do something different. And so really being more creative and having a little more control. And so in administration, you can decide, if you want to go for a program or really try and develop something that's more interesting and it seems to meet the needs of families that want that particular service. So for me, I think it was energizing to be able to be in control and actually want to work also with, I have fabulous staff and fabulous managers. And I think teaching and kind of working together, I asked someone today, well, what would you say to the question, what we really kind of do here and, how we've developed as executives. And she said to me, well, I think we're developing a critical thinking. And I thought that's really very wise. It's not just saying, yes, I'll be helpful to you, but really being smart about what's needed for the agency, I think looking also, I learned something the first year I went to social work school, which was a very long time ago. And someone said, you can never assume. And in the economy now that we're in and how difficult things are and programs being cut, you can never assume that there isn't a more creative way to do it. Everything is data-driven right now, so you have to be very smart about your outcomes. But there's still possibilities. And right now, everyone is worried about what's going to happen in mental health, but we just started 2 new programs for children. So if you're looking, if you're kind of curious and enthusiastic and you really want to make something happen with families, join them, as partners. I think that there's still possibilities. And that, everyone talks about what a rough time it is, but it's also kind of a challenging time to get things to happen. So I feel very proud, of being a social worker. The doctorate has gotten me places that I'd never anticipated. Being on boards of primary care facilities to kind of make that partnership with health. Things that I never thought I'd be able to do. So I think being a social worker is really a great, great, great niche that one is lucky to find if that's what you want. I think we're all kind of very committed, right?
So what advice do you guys have for people who are students now, but who are interested in becoming leaders, either in their communities or in the agencies where they work?
Well, I think, for one, I think we are all always maintaining role models, people that I've always gone to for advice. And it's interesting, I've always had that, I'll always have that, and then I find myself in that role now as well, being a mentor to others. I think you give as much as you get, and or get as much as you give, I'm sorry. And so I found that to be really helpful as I look for opportunities. Also, I do like to sort of look under the rock sometimes for non-traditional opportunities in the social work profession. I really made a career out of that and pursuing, particularly with politics. And some of it is I used to, as I became involved in politics, I'd announce myself as a social worker. And sometimes after the meeting or after we had, someone will come up and say, I went to social work school, but I don't announce myself as a social worker. And I'm like, well, why is that? Because in fact, in those rooms that I'm involved in, and whether it be in government or in whatever sort of work I'm doing, I'm bringing all of my social work skills with me, and I'm in fact employing and engaging and doing the work of our profession. It may not just be sitting across from a client, but it's from a systems perspective. And I've made some mistakes along the way as well. I ran, this was 6 years ago, I ran for a seat on the San Jose City Council. And my consultant that I had hired, when we were looking at the ballot statement, I said, well, I'm a social worker. And he said, well, you can't put social worker on your ballot statement because you'll lose. And I got scared, right, because I wanted to win. And so I said, okay, so I didn't put it on. And instead, at the time I was a executive of a nonprofit organization, so they placed nonprofit executive on my ballot statement. I ended up losing anyway, very narrowly, 49 votes out of 23,000 votes that were cast. It took 3 weeks to lose. It was horrible. I was up and down and up and down. But I learned a valuable lesson because when I went and opened up my ballot and I saw nonprofit executive and I didn't see social worker, it didn't feel right. And that's a conflict that we all have sometimes in our work. And I was having this conflict, and I vowed, whether I won or lost, I was never going to make that mistake again. 4 years later, in 2010, I ran for a seat on the Open Space Authority, and I put social worker as my designation, and I won. So, and it really taught me a lot that how important it is to really be true to yourself and to take pride in your profession, no matter what area of practice you're engaged in.
I think advice I would give you is to say that not only, first of all, let me say how glad I am that the handful of you that are here, because I'm not surprised at all that the room's not packed, because a lot of people approach social work to work one-on-one with clients, and they never picture themselves becoming administrators, and I don't think anyone here described going to school to become an administrator. But I think that all the rules that apply to working with clients guide your work as an administrator. It's not a one-to-one correlation. But even now in your placements, I'm sure that you work with people, your peers, your colleagues, the agencies where you work, where you hear people who are really disempowered and they're struggling. Our clients need us to figure out how to solve the problems that threaten our social service agencies. And it's us, we are the ones who will do it. If we wait for other people to figure out how to solve our agency problems and our clients' problems, one, they may never come, and if they do, we won't like the solutions they come up with. So it's really on us to figure out how to keep our agencies alive for our clients who need them. So my advice to you would be to keep coming to conversations like this, and really try to get, when you hear other students or when you hear colleagues, I don't want to say complaining, but let's say sounding really disempowered, start brainstorming with them what's within your reach, because that's how I never thought I would be an administrator. I was a sign language interpreter before I got a bachelor's in social work, but I never thought I would be an administrator, and now I love it, and I feel like I figured out that I have some of the skills that it requires, and I learned new ones that I didn't have, and the clients at our agencies really need us to do that. And I also really resonated with what you said, Sylvia, about creating a kind of organization that feels just to you. And I think that's also my advice to you, is to remember that the same kind of justice that you want for your clients, you do want for yourselves and for your colleagues. And as an administrator, you can get yourself into a position where you can create a dialogue about things like difference, power, and privilege. That you can start a conversation like that as an administrator that you may not be able to start in other roles. So my advice is keep having conversations like this.
And I would say try to keep doing something about it. I think that to start in a job that's not really, doesn't meet your satisfaction level, move on and get something else where you can really throw yourself into it. I think all of the people that work with us in the Bronx really want to do that job. And they bring different ideas, and they have all kinds of thoughts of things that maybe the administration wouldn't even think of, that we can tap into because they have a different way of seeing something. So the vision, I think, of many perspectives, and not being like a line worker going along just following. Don't do that. Take a chance. Try something different. Try a different agency if it doesn't seem to work for you. I didn't think I would say such a thing, where that came from. But we all should be really enjoying, to some extent, what we're doing. And I think then it always shows.
And I think, I resonate with that you should try another agency, and if you can't, because let's say you can't find a job, I think you should do something that gives you sort of, I want to say pleasure, in a sense that I think that we do good work when we don't think of things as necessarily as work. So if you want to change something in your community, you could become involved and do that. But I guess, I don't know if it's advice, but I can talk about, because I think everybody's different. I don't really like the idea that, someone's a leader. I think we all could be leaders, so I sort of cringe at that sometimes. So I don't like the word leadership in there. But anyway, because I do think that, especially in the social work profession lately, we've become so institutionalized, and we tend to think that one is a leader or one is a therapist. It's sort of a job rather than, it's part of who you are as a human being. But I also am cognizant that from my own experience that I was lucky. I was lucky to, one of the first jobs I had, I ended up working for the Miss Foundation for Women. And I was lucky because the president at the time, and now she's the founder and president of the White House Project, Marie Wilson, became my mentor. And one of the things she says is, you can't be what you can't see, which is actually a quote from Wright Edelman, who, and I believe that. I think that it's important that you have mentors, but also that you seek out people who can support you. And sometimes you're lucky and privileged, and we're all privileged because you all go to NYU, so you will have those opportunities that other people might not. And I think to use that and to sort of own up to it and move on and try to change things that you can in your own communities, and know that sometimes you can't, and see what you want to do with that frustration.
The only other thing I would add is, and I think it's some of the stuff that you're saying also, is that leadership's not a job title, right? I mean, leadership is the work that you do and how you make an impact on the people you work for and the people you work with. So if you want to get in leadership, you make sure you know why you want to get into leadership. Is it to achieve a job title, or is it to do kind of transformational work? And once you decide the reason, then you kind of go forward. Because anyone can get it. I mean, a job title is one thing, but we have, there's, the longer you're around, the more you see leaders in all different capacities in your organizations, and their job titles and their pay scale don't necessarily always correlate with leadership. So, I think that's just an important thing about what it means to be a leader too. So just to keep that in mind,
I think that's a really good point. I know in the work that I've been doing in politics and advocacy, there are a number, and this is no surprise, of highly narcissistic people that are drawn to public service, that are pursuing titles, and pursuing those opportunities and doing it, and they will say one thing, and of course behind the closed door they behave in another way. So what I try to do, of course, is to be that integrated person, to always know why it is that I'm pursuing these opportunities, and then also to stop and pause when you have accomplishments and successes that are on behalf of who you're advocating for. I just was doing that last week in San Jose. San Jose became one of the first cities in the country to pass its own higher minimum wage. It was very controversial in the city of 1 million people, one of the 10th largest city in the country, to pass minimum wage. And it was very difficult because it meant there was a lot of money from the Chamber of Commerce and other interests that were up against it. And I was a community leader to be a champion for this higher minimum wage, and it really came about economic empowerment for the clients, the people that I know that social workers serve, about trying to improve their standard of living in one of the most costly places in the country to live in. I used all my social work skills when I was doing that. Lots of listening, lots of finding common ground, mediation, but also articulating the needs of the population that we were trying to help, and standing up to power and privilege. And I think social workers are uniquely qualified to serve in those roles, and you don't need to have a title to do that. And in fact, it's really incumbent upon all of us to take those responsibilities. It's in our code of ethics to be a champion for our clients and our communities. And so I use that all the time. In fact, I keep always close by me, I keep the NASW code of ethics, because because I use that each and every day to help keep me moving in the right direction.
Well, it's so wonderful to hear all of you talk about the social work skills that you learned in social work school. Are there any particular things that have helped you develop those skills to be, I know you're going to cringe at the word leadership, but to be better leaders in the agencies that you're in now?
I think all of us must have had mentors that really helped us, which then kind of gives you the motivation to make sure that there are other leaders in our group that are, coming behind and forward and should be in front of us eventually. So I think that piece of having someone who is good to you in your career and finding somebody that really is smart and has the right values, I think you can't move into administration without having that perspective. Someone has to kind of share that with you. So, at FEGS we have this logo, partnerships in a changing world. And I think partnership is crucial to everything that we do. It's similar to what you were saying, I think, but partnership kind of works for me. So I think that partnership with mentors and then being a mentor is extremely important.
I think for me, what I've tried to do to improve my ability to serve in a leadership role is to work across sectors. And that means sometimes being the only social worker in the room, and that can be uncomfortable. One of the ways I did that, the last 6 months, I just began serving. I was asked to serve on the board of the Law Foundation of Silicon Valley, which is a $10 million huge foundation. And I looked at the board. When you get asked to serve on a board, you look and you do your assessment, right? Because we're social workers, we learn, right, about everything. So I went to their website. I looked at the list. Every single one of the other board members were major partners of large international law firms. And I sort of gasped. I mean, I'm a farm boy. Like, what in the world? How am I going to end up there? How am I going to hold my own? And there was a part of me that wanted to run the other way and go, no. But I realized why it was that they were asking me to do it, because this is a large foundation that provides social services, and yet they didn't have a social worker on their board. And yet their staff were all social workers. And so it was a unique opportunity for me to be a champion for the staff on the governing board, but also to bring the social work perspective to attorneys who are there because they care as well about their community, but they may not be hearing it in the boardroom. And that really has an impact on the service delivery for the organization. And so I accepted, and I've gone to several board meetings now, and sometimes it's hard for me to get my word in because these attorneys are all big talkers. But I'm finding the common ground with this very diverse group of people, a room that I might not otherwise have ever met these individuals. But they're getting respect for me as a social worker, and I'm getting respect for them, and that's also how we make social change. And so I think what I've really tried to do to build my leadership ability is to take those risks. They don't always succeed, right? Sometimes it's a bad fit, but to more often than not try to break out from just sort of what's comfortable in your work. And I think you can gain a lot from that, and it can open you up to new opportunities.
I also think one of the things for me was, in becoming an administrator, you do a lot more, budgets than you ever imagined. You have to do a lot more program planning and a lot more administrative work. And I think that usually as a clinician, you don't tend to think of administration. They're just two different things. And I think that that's probably not helpful for students because in the real world, when you have a job and you might want to be not just have private practice and be a clinician, but you might want to work in an agency and be part of that change, which means that at some point in some role you'll be an administrator. And I think that I've seen a lot of administrators who just don't have the skills they need in order to succeed. And as a result, everybody sort of suffers. So I think it's important that as you go on in your career, you sort of are aware and honest with yourself about what you know, what you don't know, and then you go and you improve with those skills that you don't know, rather than thinking, well, I don't really need that, I'm a clinician, it's stupid to learn how to do a budget, because you'll need to, and if you don't, it's just going to make it much more difficult for everyone else.
The one thing I'll add one more about what things that I learned here, I think is this I work in a New York City Bronx high school in the South Bronx, and high school kids are, an interesting lot. And I think being in social work school, you learn how to remain neutral. You learn how to, be calm, not to overreact in situations when there are situations, when the situations are dicey and things get, intense quickly. So I think that has served me well in my work, because some of it might be my genetic makeup, and some of it might be work experience, and some of it I think is stuff that I learned here. It's just like not to get too high or low in situations, and try to maintain a nice neutrality about what's going on, and try to kind of get through all the hysteria and things that are occurring to get to really the underlying issue of what's going on, whether it's financial bottom line or programmatic bottom line or a human resources bottom line. It's trying to just knowing that there are underlying causes to everything. To look under the tip of that iceberg. I think social work school has really it was a big part of helping me kind of do that in my kind of day-to-day work.
You raised something interesting that I've been thinking a lot this week about hearing about General Petraeus and the problems he's had. And one of the things that I think all of us, the more you practice social work, you're always challenging your boundaries, and you're really beginning that skill, right? About learning about what your boundaries are. And that continues in the profession. It continues in a number of jobs. It continues as managers in management, about appropriate boundaries that are professional boundaries that are in line with our professional skills. And sometimes working as in non-traditional environments, I see a lot of boundaries that are all over the place. People becoming friends and socializing and patronage, and in the nonprofit sector, there's a lot of that that's very uncomfortable. Certainly in politics, it's all over the place. And I think what makes me effective as a social worker is that I really follow everything that I learned that began when I was a social work student, and then continued. And it means that sometimes my boundaries get tested, but I'm very clear as a social worker. I'm comfortable with those boundaries, those ethical boundaries. I'm also working with others. And, I just think those, you don't realize it at the time when you're a social work student, because it's helping you sort of navigate with your professional boundaries with your clients, but it's also to help you in the workplace as well. And I think that's something that I'm always working on all the time, because there are a lot of challenges to that in the workplace. And you're sometimes asked to do things that you are unethical in order to move forward. And it's really important that you only sustain that and hold that and be true to your professional obligations.
Also, on a more practical level, one of the things I think helped me is I knew earlier on, and I think because you're in school and you're graduating and so forth, what populations I could work with and what populations I couldn't. And you have to be honest about, and for whatever reason, you could sort of analyze it and look at the resistances, and by the time you figure it out, it's 2 years down the road and you're unhappy at your job, or you're not good at it because there's something missing. So I think to sort of do that check and be like, what is the population, what is the one thing I can't do, and I don't want to work with this, particular, for example, kids. I worked with kids, interestingly enough, and I decided I don't want to work with kids. But I know that about myself, and I know why, and so forth. But I think that's important, and to really not look, to try to, if you can, and if you have the money. But if you need, I understand that if you need a job, it's a job. But if you could stay away from that, it's probably more helpful.
I also think that connects to staff. Mm-hmm. Your staff, when you're like an administration or leader, there's some people you have a hard time working with, But and it's just like, you learn here, like they're clients you're gonna have to work with that you don't really necessarily connect to or have issues with, and you kind of have to figure out ways to either put that aside or reflect on that and ask someone else to kind of help you with that. You have to do that with staff sometimes too, and sometimes working with your staffs, even though I work with amazing people, there's some people I have a harder time working with than I do with the young people that I work. I rather work with the young people than with some of the adults sometimes, and you have to recognize that, and you have to figure out ways how to manage that, or turn it over to one of your colleagues and say, listen, I don't really do so well with this issue or with this person. Can you, help me here? If you pick up the slack and to kind of, understand that, I think social work schools help me realize that for people, it's either an issue of desire or it's an issue of ability, and you have to kind of find out which one it is with them and then attack it. But there's some people who you just have a hard time with, and how do you move that over to someone else if you can't do it?
So what have been some of the most surprising things, both good and bad, about the work that you all do, both as social workers and as administrators and leaders?
I think it was unexpected for me, very unexpected, that I sometimes think I'm a CPA rather than a social worker. And then I met someone who was very involved in their programs, and she said to me, no margin, no mission. If you don't have the money, you're not going to be able to do the program. And it kind of turned me around a little bit to be more business savvy and to learn business skills. And I know one of your questions was about what should people do in social work school, what kind of class do you really need? Everybody needs a management class and everybody needs a business class. I'm working with staff now who are taking business classes at night so they can really figure out how to expand their programs. And it's not, it shouldn't be seen as such a negative. It really should be seen as a very important skill set. And I think that we've been able to do some interesting things this year because we did get creative with, conceptualizing a program and then looking for the funding. But if you don't have that perspective, you can't do it. You can't just talk about the needs of the family. You have to figure out how you're going to show that outcomes changed. And that's a very important perspective for every social worker to have now. I think the doctoral program really did that for me, coming from that kind of psychoanalytic background, It was totally different to be constantly using critical thinking. Is this going to work? Is this what the family really wants? Are these the services that are really needed? Kind of backing up the ethical issues. So I think very, very, very important that everybody has a business sense, because otherwise programs are not going to, right now we're in a very, very fragile time, and we need to be able to keep developing programs that work.
I was very surprised that I actually enjoy the budget aspects. I think it makes me think of what you said earlier, Marjorie, about feeling in control. Even if the bottom line's not looking good, I need to know exactly where it is. And then the other thing I was surprised to realize that I enjoy is grant writing. So I think, assuming that a lot of you are going to wind up in nonprofits, figure out how to read a budget and figure out how to get people to give you their money. And social workers are actually, what I found is that they're very, very good at it, because you know how to persuade people with your passion that what you're doing is critical, that they have the cash and you have the expertise. So social workers, I find, are good grant writers. I mean, they need help with the organizational piece and editing and things like that. But in terms of spinning a compelling proposal, social workers are great.
I have a sign on my desk whenever I meet with anyone, and it says, "Trust in God, but give me the data." You can't fool anybody anymore without the data.
I also think, as much as I have my frustrations with having gone into analytic training, I think that helped me a lot. It really shaped me as a clinician. And I always say to people, I don't know if an analytic institute is necessarily now the place to be at anymore. They're pretty rigid, as it turns out. But I think it's good to learn one thing, so you're able to criticize it and you're able to shape it and change it. Oftentimes I think, especially with psychoanalysis, for example, people always sort of are negative towards it and have their reservations. And most of the time, those reservations are really based on certain things they've heard about it rather than certain things they know about it. So I think it's important to know one thing or one theory or one school of thought really well. And then you could say, this is what I don't agree with and I want to change, but at least know one of them. That's my biggest thing that I think is important. It teaches you how to think. It teaches you how to sort of construct cases. It also teaches you, I think, how to be a good manager, because you learn a lot about people and about how they act and what motivates them.
Yeah, I think a couple things. One is, I've seen in executive leadership, and social workers fall into this sometimes. They get involved in an executive management role, and they hear from other executives, you got to operate it like a business, and they sort of fake it, right? They sort of fake it, and it's a disaster, because you know that sometimes people can't even balance your own checkbook, right? Let alone governing an agency. So I think what's important is for when you're beginning this work, I think similar to finding out whether that's a good fit for you to actually be involved in an executive management position, is that yes, it's important to be able to operate a nonprofit like a business, but we're still social workers, right? That doesn't mean we're just going to spend all the money as long as it's in the checkbook, in the bank. But we also use all those skills that we have about how to manage and how to govern. And in fact, so much of what you do as you're learning now about working with a client that's having difficulty with managing their life, when you're running an organization, it's very similar, right? You're trying to make certain to, be transparent and shed a light on all the choices and look at outcomes and look at data, look at, consequences. All those things that you're working with your clients on are the very same things, and whenever I've led an organization that I'm engaged in. I think some of the surprises that I've had when I ran for the seat on the San Jose City Council, I came at it very much like a social worker. The district I was running in had 100,000 people in it, and so I started off as an outreach worker. I mean, that's probably what I do best, is outreach. I love being out on the street talking to people, and so I went door to door to among registered voters and knocked on their door and talked to them and got to see where they live, and I called it 30,000 home visits basically is what I was doing. And you learn a lot. It's the same thing that now, as you learn so much from your clients, is very much the same way that when I ran for that office, I learned from the very constituency that I was going to be serving. But I also learned a lot of things that troubled me. For example, one was my political consultant got so mad because he found out that I would walk into certain parts of the district that had very few registered voters. And he said, well, don't waste your time walking in that apartment complex because there are no registered voters there. And I understood it, from his profession, which was, political consulting. It made no sense. But as a social worker, how could I was preparing myself to serve. How could I just avoid that complex? So I ended up just lying to him, right? I ended up just going in anyway, and I disappeared for a couple hours. He couldn't get me on the phone, and that's where I was, because I wanted to make certain so that I was preparing myself to serve as a result of that. And it really shed a light on a lot of challenges that we have about making certain that those that are most in need of service are oftentimes those with the least amount of access. And as a social worker, that's something that I fight each and every day, fight for each and every day. And I never lose that perspective no matter what room I'm in. And I get that by the experiences that I've had along my career path.
So for students who are interested in going into your fields of work, are there specific experiences or licenses or even courses that are required or recommended?
I'll speak about schools. I think the school social work class when I was here at NYU, though it was more legal issues and court cases that have to do with school social work issues, I thought it was really great. And then if you want to be a school social worker in the New York City Board of Ed, you have to get licensed by the state, and you can go to the New York State website or the Department of Education's website. And they're great jobs, and they're good jobs, and they're jobs that people really kind of look for. And so those are the kind of the credentials that people need for them for those positions.
I would would say for those of you who are first years, I think the POPs project is great. I mean, students don't always love it, but you know, when we have interns at Safe Horizon, we really encourage them to pursue a real POPs project, something that can actually be implemented. And I think it really, if you pursue it that way, it will touch on probably everything that we've discussed here today. You have to analyze the organization, so you have to figure out the formal hierarchy. You have to figure out what the real, true, informal, who's really running the place. You have to figure out how to get to those people. You have to figure out how to get support for your project. You have to, you know, everything that we talked about today. It's a little exercise in you know, program development, which is a huge part of administration. So. I love the POPs project.
Yeah. Especially if it's useful. I mean, if it's useful for the organization, right? Because from a human resources perspective, it's hard to get good people. It really is. So, you know, I've been a field instructor for, I think, I don't know, whatever, like 9 years or something, and I've had like, you know, 20 maybe NYU interns, and when you get someone good, you don't want to give them up. Like, you want to keep, like, you want them to stay. You want them, you know, they've made an impact on your community. They've made an impact on your school, and they've done, or school, in my perspective, they've done a great job, and you want to hold on to them. So I think, in terms of, you know, what you need in credentials and stuff like that, all that stuff could be worked out. It's like, go to a place, find a need, and fill it, right? And like, show people you could, like, you know, you could do good things, you could do a good job, you can be impactful in the community, and the POPs project is a good place to do it. That's what made me think of it. But like, where the times are difficult, and it's jobs are scarce and stuff like that. But when you find people who are energetic and can really do something, you really want to hold on to them. You want to offer them jobs. I call back former interns all the time saying, "What are you doing now? We got an opening. Like, are you happy where you are?" And you know, sometimes, well, a lot of times they are, sometimes they're not. And well, but if you do good work, come on board.
And if you interview for a job, follow up. Because the other day I got this email from somebody that came for an interview, and it was fantastic. She had all these ideas about some new program that we're going about. I loved her, you know, I can't wait till she starts. And I thought, most people, they have the interview, they wait, they wait. She took an aggressive stance, you know, she threw herself right at us without, you know, any concern about what we might think. And it was beautiful to see. So that's somebody, you know, we're very open, and I think that you need to find places where you can be open, but that's what makes everything move more quickly and happen. So don't hesitate to write an email after a job interview.
Yeah, I think in so many ways we've all benefited from the generosity of others and other social workers. And when you have been a recipient of that generosity, you tend to give back as well. And I know that's a commitment I've always had to encouraging young people to pursue social work as a profession, and then also to helping others in the profession. And so I do the same thing. I'm very active in recruiting and trying to help social workers get the right fit in different social work environments. A bit of a matchmaker, I think, is how I view my work. And also giving back to NYU. I've always been active in the Alumni Association here ever since I graduated. And also other social work schools as well, because, you know, this is, you know, we're part of a profession. And so it's in our best interest for all of us to be very engaged in making certain that we have high quality social workers that are working in a diverse work environment. So, you know, that's something that you know, I want to encourage all of you to do as you're looking ahead to graduation for the second years. And also being part of NASW, and I've been very active in the California chapter of NASW, and I encourage others to be involved in our professional associations. I think it's really helpful to also how the public views us. I think if there's any obstacle that I find a lot because of the nature of my work is I get a lot of, there are a lot of perspectives about our profession that are shared by other professions that are not positive. And I see that, I get that a lot. And so I am a public face of the social work profession in politics. And so I get to see it all the time. And sometimes I'm a little lonely. I wish there were a few more, with us. But I'm very much aware of that, and that I'm being watched, and how I work is being watched. But I see opportunities there that hopefully improve the profession and the work that others are doing with clients. That a lot of funding, for example, comes from government. And government oftentimes is completely unaware of exactly what it is social workers do. Right? What they get is a way that many Americans get their information is from TV. And we know that that's not a good description of the work that social workers do. So I think the more that you can really take advantage of opportunities beyond, and I know it's difficult when you're working 40 hours a week or 50 hours a week, I think social workers work, to think about working outside of just their direct practice area, but to spend some time really being part of the professional opportunities, because that, in fact, even though you may not be able to see it right away, it really does help the work and build more opportunities for you in your career.
One of the things I wanted to say that I think is very important, of course, you can get all the licenses and you can do all that, and that's part of, we all know that. But I think one of the things that is most helpful is to really find someone to find a supervisor. It may not necessarily be your supervisor at work, if that's may not be the place, but to find someone who supervises you both clinically, but also sort of from a career perspective, and someone who challenges you. I think that's very important, especially since you're all beginning your career. I do think it's important to have a good clinical supervisor, so you could sort of figure out your own issues and figure out how they play into everything that you do. And one of the things I've learned is whenever I think I know something really well, that's probably because I don't. Yeah. So never think, whenever you think, and especially if you get to be an administrator, and I think the more you get up there, the more your ego could go up and be like, oh yeah, I've got this. I know exactly what I'm doing. And then someone comes in and says, well, maybe you should do it this way. And then you get all upset about it, like, no, this is not going to go this way. So I think it's important to really keep yourself in check, and that's why I think if you have a good supervisor in the beginning, you learn the nuances and you learn to challenge yourself, and you learn that if you're too comfortable with something, that means you're probably missing something, and if you feel you know something really well, you probably don't. And that's the biggest thing that I think helped me. I had a good supervisor, who, I had good mentors, and I had people who, and I continue to have even friends that, sort of challenge me all the time. And whenever I say something, it's like, well, what do you mean by that? Or, oh, you just said that. And I think that keeps me in check. And if I said anything here at some point, at the end, if you have something that, I sort of came up for you that's relevant, I want you to approach me, because I think that's how we all learn.
I think the stance is not, is to be a learner, right? To constantly be a learner, but also, and this is kind of a weird, I think, thing for social workers is, but also don't be afraid to be a kind of shameless self-promoter, right? I mean, there's nothing wrong with that, really. I mean, you should be proud of the work you did, and I don't just mean like, telling people how great you are, but like, though you, I'm sure are, go out and like make those network connections, right? Like, I mean, I think, I think the pay scale for something like this up here is, I don't know, you guys might get paid a lot more than I am, but you're doing it because you're still maintaining connections, you're still giving back, you're still, making new connections to both people who are students, to the organization NYU, that you were here, to other people. You don't know where you're going to meet people next. It's kind of, it's a really small network in, a large place, right? I'm just speaking about New York, but like, it's you don't know how important networking is, and doing things that aren't connected to your 9-to-5 job are important. Mm-hmm. So whether it's part of, actual organizations, or, politically involved stuff, or social media, there are many different ways to kind of just get yourself out there and become known, not just for the sake of being known, but for the sake of furthering your work and furthering, your career, especially around things you're really passionate and interested about, because that's why we do this work. So like, don't be afraid to put yourself out there as much as possible.
Also, you mentioned compensation. I do think that's important. I think one of the things that social workers don't do is to really sort of ask for what one should be making. And I think it's important when you apply for a job to talk to people in the field to find out what the base salary should be, what's the median salary, and we often don't do that. And this is capitalism, so I have news for you. You're going to be exploited anywhere you go. And I think you need to know that, and also need to, and I know it's a job market that's very difficult, but I think social workers in particular, because we want to give back, we want to help the community, sometimes we're being exploited more than ever in this economy, and because everybody wants a job, so you end up taking a job where you will work. I think one of the biggest surprises, as you mentioned, what was the negatives, was that you work a lot and you get burned out, and in most agencies, you're not really appreciated. I mean, I love to tell you, people are going to come and say, you're wonderful, we love you. No, it's going to be like, next, let's, we have 10,000 clients, great, can you do this, can you do this? And I think the salary will help because you want to take a vacation, that will help you. And I think everybody should take, every 6 months, if you can, take at least 2 weeks off, because otherwise you'll go crazy.
And I think that's great. You're such a great social worker. Right? When I became an executive director, the first thing I did was doubled everyone's vacation. And all these other executive directors started calling me saying, you don't get it, that's not your job. Your job is to try to hold costs down and try to make people work more. And I said, but you don't get it. I was fighting back. I said, you don't get it. All my social workers are burned out. And they're hoarding their vacation as well. So they weren't even taking the vacation that they had. Then they'd burn out, then they'd be sick, then they'd leave to another agency. So all these problems, so it was really economics, right? So I said, I'm going to give everyone 6 weeks vacation and they have to take it. Or I'm keeping them out of the office, right? And the social workers were amazed at this, that I had done this, but it came from being a social worker and being burned out and all of that. And I give that advice a lot of times to new executive directors to look at that, look at their pay scale. I ran into the same problem. When I moved to California, I was working for county government. And when I was there, I went around and met with one of the things I did was we gave a lot of money to nonprofits through grants. And when I met with all the nonprofit directors, they'd all complain about this, right? They'd all say, well, I can't seem to keep any outreach workers. I can't keep any social workers. And it's because government doesn't pay us enough. I said, okay, so I went back and I figured out all the grants and I found more money and I figured out, I said, I want to give you all these grants, but I have a base pay, I need you to pay your outreach workers. And suddenly they all freaked out. They're like, no, don't do that, because then that affects our secretaries. And I said, but no, I'm going to give a reasonable, I mean, you never earn what you're worth. I mean, that is never going to happen. But we want people in this profession for a long time, because every year you're practicing, you are getting better at it. And sadly, far too many social workers work in their 20s and mid-30s and then change and go to different careers because they're not making enough money to support their families. And I think one of the goals that I have is when any executive management position I'm in is to change that dynamic. I want to see people pursue social work and work in the profession for 30 and 40 years. There aren't enough, sadly, of people that are doing that and choosing our profession because they see it as something they can do for the rest of their working lives.
The other thing that you brought up, which is which came to mind when we talked about the quality of life, and I think, obviously as a woman we've been taught to think this way, or we are allowed to talk about it, but I think as men, especially as young men, you should think about the quality of life, but also the work and personal life balance. I think one of the things that I've seen, especially in social service agencies in particular, is that we're notorious for saying how long can we stay at work, and if you stay till 12 o'clock, you're so dedicated, and this is so great, you're a great worker. But then you're not a great human, because that means that you don't have a family, or if you have a family, you're not connecting to those people, which eventually doesn't make you a good worker because it makes you feel alone and probably depressed and burned out. So I think as you get there, make sure that you can do those things, which is to have that balance. But if you ever get in a position of power, or if you ever get as an administrator, to really remember that work is just part of our lives. It's not our whole lives. And we tend to forget that. And I know because I forgot that. I was one of those.
Well, and I think you began by saying about, these are values that we advocate for our clients and their families. And yet somehow we fail to do that for ourselves and our families. And so it's being an integrated person. It's really important to not lose sight of that. particularly in executive management. And I've seen social workers in executive management who don't do that. It's very troubling to me because I think that sometimes they felt like they couldn't do that. They lost sight of everything they learned in graduate school. And so for those of us that are in these roles, it's important that we hold each other accountable for those values in our profession.
Well, just before we end up, if we want to open it up for questions for anyone in the audience about leadership or the intersection between that and social work.
How do you, I'm sorry, Kimberly, you might have touched on this, but what are some of the best skills or advice you give about dealing with conflict in terms of like administrators or staff or like working with other organizations? Because I know like social workers, especially if you're, we're just out of school, it's like dealing with conflict in the workplace is not pleasant, so but it's inevitable, I think, so just any advice you can.
For me, it's know what you can change and know what you cannot change. And sometimes depending on, I think it's important because we work in organizations that are structured based on power, and I think it would be, it would be sort of dishonest to say that when you start off in your career, if you have conflict with someone who has power, you could really change that. You could try, you could also lose your job, and you probably don't want to do that. And that's realistic, and I think we have to be very realistic. So I think know what is it that you can say and what is it that you can say to this person, and also how can you interact with them in a way that could get the work done, and rather than, not to make it too personal. Sometimes it may be personal, and I've seen situations where, people really hate their supervisors or their bosses, and that does happen. And sometimes it's because their bosses are really people who are not nice, and that also happens. So now I'm not one of these people like, well, maybe it's also, maybe you too, but also oftentimes people may have issues that they haven't resolved. So I think it's know that and try to talk to other people that are outside of the situation to help you sort of see it from a more objective perspective, but also accept the fact that sometimes you may not be able to resolve it.
And I would just say conflict's not necessarily a bad thing either, right? I mean, it's gonna occur, and and I said this before, and I really do like to think of whether it's working with someone above me, or quote unquote, or someone who I'm a quote unquote boss to. When people aren't kind of doing expectations or not doing things that you kind of thought you agreed upon, I do like to look at it as is this an ability issue? Am I not setting this person up the right way, or is it not? Was it something that they're not doing because they can't do it, or is it a desire issue? Like they don't want to do this thing that I'm having the conflict about them. And then if it's a desire issue, then maybe we have to have a conversation or change the kind of expectations. But conflict is not something necessarily to be avoided. It's going to occur, and you also have to have a bottom line of what your expectations are and what like this is kind of a non-negotiable for me, but maybe these other things I could work around. But this is the one thing out of all these things that I have to have. I have to have it this way, and so being clear about that too, especially making sure that that's connected to your bottom line, mission, and vision, right? Where it's this is the one thing that can't will really change your organization or what we care about, and I can't have that done differently. So that's what I would say for conflict.
I think it raises questions too. I think it puts things out there that maybe you haven't discussed before. I see the young social workers coming into our place. There's so much to learn. And when they have difficulty, I think it's because we haven't done enough training and we haven't really helped them to understand why we do certain things the way we do. Because there's so many policies and procedures, right? And they're there for a reason. But sometimes we don't say what the reason is. So I've been helping the managers to think more about all of the different perspectives. There's not just one idea here. There's many ideas, How did that family think about it? How did the worker think about it? How did the administrator think about it? There's so many different perspectives that have to be considered. So I think that it's extremely important to raise the dialogue a little bit, and like you were saying, not be afraid of the conflict, but really kind of encourage the discussion.
I also want to add that I think most of us, all of us, want to be good at our jobs, and that's across the board. So what I found very helpful, especially if there's conflict around work, is to really sort of approach that person with a very clear agenda, whether you're the one setting the agenda or they are, to ask, what is it that you would like me to do? So can we write down what are your expectations? So then it gives you and it gives the other person very clear, defined task and boundary. So then there is no boundary crossing, but also it doesn't become about, no, well, I thought you wanted me to do this, no, you wanted me. So it's really about the work, and then you could focus on the work, and then if you're able to accomplish those things, then you could say, wow, this is great. And if you're not, then you could have an honest discussion with yourself, like, maybe this is not for me, maybe this is just not the right fit. So I think I like things that are concrete sometimes, that really helps.
Yeah, I want to echo. I mean, I think inherent in every job, it's still a job, and you're going to have conflict with others. And I think one of the things that I've learned is to not avoid the disappointments. The greatest lessons I've learned as a social worker have come from defeat and loss, not always from the wins, the successes. Those don't always time to teach you everything. So you're constantly learning all the time. And so if you can approach that sometimes with whether it's a conflict that you're having with a supervisor or a coworker or even something larger like an entire agency, that even while you're navigating it, you're learning, and will help you in your next opportunity. And it will help you find your way and find that best fit for you. But certainly, avoidance is usually not the best way to manage conflict. Usually the best way, I think, is articulated. And I know this a lot in politics. You have a lot of what I call brush fires along the way, where you have some pretty big conflicts, even among your allies, people that think like you do. And it's important to try not to personalize them as best. Try to keep your eyes on the prize and be really forward thinking, and try to think beyond the initial conflict, which is how can you partner to keep the work moving forward. And it does help sometimes to do that.
All right, but
One quick one. When hiring someone in a leadership position in one of your agencies or organizations, what are some key experiences or characteristics that you look for?
I mean, just for me, obviously for me, for a school, it's just some of it's experience, right? I mean, lots of it's experience, and also it's experience in organizations that are kind of like-minded and been in the same kind of, serve like the same kind of clientele and kind of same places. But also then it's also connection to vision and mission of the school, right? So at our school we have a very specific kind of mission and vision about what we do and why we do it. So the most important thing is that people could demonstrate one, their kind of belief in the mission and vision of what we do there, but also their ability to kind of things they've done in the past that are connected to that, and the ability that they can come in and be a good fit to kind of continue the mission and vision. So for us, it would be something like that.
I think we tend to hire people that are like us as much as we say we don't. And we know that because we've seen that statistically.
Which can also be a problem sometimes.
Right. And I think we need to sort of challenge ourselves. And that's why I'm always cognizant of that. People hire people that look like them. So that's, so I think if you want to have diversity when you go into an interview, you should know that about yourself. And I also, for me, it's, how much is this willing, how willing is this person to learn and to really challenge themselves? Because sometimes you could have the most wonderful experience, but I am very cognizant that some of that experience might be because instead of working for a summer job to support your families, because you've had enough money to go and do a great internship without getting paid. And I think we have to, again, we have to live by what we believe in and really look at what were the opportunities that this person had and what type of life they had and how did they work within those communities. And I think it's important to have a good education. It's also important to want to learn and to want to to have a passion. For me, passion is a very important thing, and I think that you get by sitting down with someone and talking about, you know, the job and the position. And it doesn't mean you could learn anything. I don't think you need to have 5 certifications to be good at something, because as you mentioned, you could get that later on. So it's not the most important thing.
I think if you're, I mean, you're going to have to work your way up. So what I would say is, as soon as you graduate, get an exam date. Don't take time off. Sometimes I hear people say they want to take the summer off. Don't do it. Get the exam done. If you're not positive, some administrators don't need a C in New York. If you're not positive that's a path for you, then find a job where you'll get C supervision hours. So I guess what I'd say is be really practical about it and jump on opportunities to take on more responsibility, and you'll work your way up quickly into a leadership position. Then you can parlay it to other agencies, you know. But I agree with you that you know, often we're looking for people who have direct, like at Safe Horizon, we want people who have direct experience with crime victims. But the degree to which they've got other, you know, if they can supervise students, if they can supervise staff, if they can demonstrate that they've, you know, tell me about your POPs project, tell me about your internships, tell me about problems that you solved. So I don't know, that maybe that's more nitty gritty than you.
No,
That's great.
No, especially diversity of experience, right? I mean, if you can come and say, that's one of the things I tell interns that come and work and do internship at a high school, is that the great thing about it is that you deal with so many different issues in a school, right? Because that's why so many agencies go through schools, because that's where the kids are, right? But they have everything, you know, you have unfortunately everything from, you know, homelessness to drug abuse, like every issue under the sun, you know, it exists there. So if you could, you know, you could diversify your talents and bring some things. Well, if I work with this population, I've done this, I can supervise students, I do this, I've done that, and then so people could start saying, well, I could bring you in for this, but then I know this person might be retiring in a year, so when they go, I could slide them over to here. I mean, so if you if you could bring a nice wide range of experience and ability, it really just, it does help you, especially, you know, how the world is today, where, you know, like, you know, you have so many jobs, not like, you know, you back when you'd settle in and you'd be there forever. I mean, it's different now. So the more you diversify yourself, I think it really, really helps you.
I think we're all listening for that, right? I had someone come for an interview the other day, and she put down the fact that she had been in theater before social work school. And I loved the idea that she was in theater, and for a school program, you know, where she could really use that talent, perfectly good at engaging people. So don't be afraid. Someone else the other day told me they wrote a book about cupcakes, but they got it on, you know, they did YouTube, and I thought, entrepreneurial, you know, very good for starting a program. So don't be afraid to expose those parts of yourself that you might not think are professional social work.
Right.
If you play an instrument, you know, I love to hear if people are involved in music, or they've written an article or something that meant something to them. So very open.
I think one of the things that I've learned in the years that I've been hiring and supervising and working particularly with new social workers is follow through. Mm-hmm. And you know, where you have the talkers and then you've got the doers. Be a doer. I tell you, if you do that, your work will speak for itself. And I think one of the things that I didn't realize when I got involved in executive management leadership roles, even though you know, we're all a boss, we all have bosses too, right? It never stops. Because not even the president, the boss of the American people, right? I mean, you never stop having a boss. And so to always be thinking of that as you're working with your supervisor or working with you know, your executive director, they've got a boss too. And so they want to look good. And one of the best things that I learned is to make your boss look good will in fact benefit you. So really think that. Sometimes and you know, I know that can be challenging at times, because bosses can be a pain in the ass, right? I mean, we all know it.
Yeah.
But it's really important to think about the pressures that executive managers have. It can oftentimes be a lonely job. I mean, being an executive director, just by nature of the role, you're one person usually, and it's a very lonely kind of position. So the more that you can do to kind of help that person succeed, you will also succeed, even if you don't stay at that agency. And just don't burn bridges. Try really hard not to burn bridges. That even though even in big urban environments, it still is a small world, and you don't want to get that reputation in our profession. You want to be someone that, even if you don't have the right fit, you're moving from agency to agency, that's okay, but you always want to be able to have, your reputation speak for itself in how you work.
I just want to add one more thing, because you bring up this idea of you're always having bosses. I think the other thing is, and you will, but the other perspective to always have is that the people that you're working for, and the people who are, if you're in executive leadership and you're the people who are, you're the boss of, are really your boss also, right? So servant leadership is such a big thing now, where you work to serve the people. Your job is to serve the people who are working, who you're working for, your clients, but also the people who work in your organization. So your real job is to work to make their job better and easier. And sometimes in leadership capacities in an organization, you start to think of yourself as, well, I'm the boss or whatever. Mm-hmm. Or I'm the one who wants things a certain way, and really your job is actually the opposite. It's actually to make the people who work in your organization's lives easier. And servant leadership is really such an important thing, and there's so many great books about how to kind of think that way and do things that way, to kind of and obviously social work has such a important kind of connection to that stuff, that way of thinking. So that's another way to kind of really think about, if you get into a leadership position, how much am I doing for the people I'm serving, which are both my clients and the people I work with.
Another side of that is, someone told me early on, the most important thing when you go for a job is who you report to.
Mm-hmm. That's true. It's
absolutely crucial. So, really think about that when you start looking, that you really have to click with that person. Something else that someone told me very early on that worked for me was, don't expect to move into the next position without doing some of that position. So take it on, do it, show you're really good at it, and then they'll want to put you into that next higher position. I was in a place once where there was a lot of competition around a particular job, and this fellow really thought it was coming to him. He felt very entitled, and he refused to do any of it. I did it because it needed to be done. I got the job. I wasn't looking to push him out, but he really absolutely refused to do anything that wasn't in his job description. That never works, right? That whole job description thing does not work.
And also, I think, the most honest thing that I can really say tonight that's really important is that, for me at least, it wasn't easy. I don't think I haven't gotten to this leadership role, whatever it is, very easily. I mean, I've been in these positions, but it was struggles, it was frustrations. There were moments where I'm like, oh my God, I hate this. And I think that that's important, because I think sometimes we like to see the end product and think that, oh, okay, we're going to get to leadership and everything will be great. And it's not. And once you get there, it's still a struggle. So I think it's important to remember, especially in social work, and especially because it's such a demanding field and it's so difficult, that you will have bad days. We all still have bad days. And that's why I think it's important to find out what you really like. Find one thing that you really like, and that keeps you grounded, because there'll be moments when you would not want to do it.
Great. Well, on that note, I want to say thank you to everyone who came tonight to the panel, and thank you to our wonderful panel members for sharing both your experiences and your time with us. So, thank you.
Thanks for having us.
Thank you.